Inside of the Fuhrerbunker, on the 30th of April 1945, a gunshot changed the course of a nation and the Second World War. Adolf Hitler lay dead inside of his study, and there was a huge question as to what would happen now. He stipulated inside of his will that his art collection was to be left to a gallery in his hometown of Linz, and that whatever else of value was to be given to the Nazi Party. But Hitler also made sure that the title of Führer, or Dictator of the Nazi nation, died with him, and he divided his power between, in particular, two people. These were Admiral Karl Donitz, who became the President of the Reich and the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, and also Joseph Goebbels. But there had been a number of other successors to Hitler, but each of these men who wielded significant amounts of power had rather disastrous falls from grace, and some of them were even ordered to be executed by Hitler if they were captured for treason. Join us today as we look at the disastrous successors of Adolf Hitler, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. One of the first men who would be given the authority to succeed Hitler in the event of his death or demise was Rudolf Hess. Hess was the Deputy Fuhrer, and he received this position on the 21st of April 1933, and he was for a long time seen as the man who would step in if there were any problems with Hitler. Hess was an experienced First World War soldier, and he was also someone who joined the Nazi Party as early as 1920, and he was a man who was as loyal as a dog to Hitler. He would do whatever he could to remain inside of Hitler's good books, and he was also the one who assisted in the writing of Mein Kampf. Hess held a number of other significant titles inside of the SS and inside of the party, but he was to only use the title of Deputy Fuhrer as ordered by Hitler. Hess also oversaw a number of offices in government, but what made him different to other members of the Nazi Party and Hitler's inner circle was that he was not motivated by power himself, but instead motivated by his loyalty to Hitler and his desire to be of use for him. But Hess, during the Second World War, embarked on a huge mission to allegedly try and broker peace with the British. He had become obsessed with the idea that he was doing Hitler's work and that the dictator would be happy with him, and he went on a strange risky flight in a Messerschmitt Bf 110 and crash-landed in Scotland in May 1941. Hess had been mistaken though, and this was not what Hitler wanted, and now his number 2 and deputy was inside of Allied captivity. He was even imprisoned inside of the Tower of London, and would then be passed for a number of years inside different houses, considered a very important prisoner for the British, before Hess was brought to the Nuremberg trials. He was later sentenced to life imprisonment, and possibly his flight to Britain saved him from the hangman's gallows, because of the fact, when much of the Holocaust had been carried out during the war, Hess had been inside Allied captivity. But Hess was considered the last Nazi of Spandau Prison, and he died inside of the prison under rather strange circumstances in August 1987 at the age of 93. But Hitler was of course furious with Hess when he found out about the attempted peace mission and the flight. He was not in the mood to negotiate at all, and he then stripped Hess of all his party offices and ranks, relieving him of the position of Deputy Fuhrer on the 12th of May 1941. He then ordered that if Hess ever set foot inside of Nazi Germany again, then he would be arrested and would be executed for treason. He was the first of Hitler's disastrous successors. One man who was said to have been the second most powerful man within the Nazi Party was Hermann Goring, the head of the Luftwaffe. Goring was a well-known man across the nation, and he was a celebrated World War I pilot and fighter ace, but he remained inside of the Nazi Party from the very start, and was even wounded during the Beer Hall Putsch. But Goring had many different titles and roles, including the President of the Reichstag, but on the 1st of September 1939, following the German invasion of Poland, Hitler made a speech, and he claimed in this that it would be Hermann Goring who should succeed him, if anything should befall me. In this he was naming Goring as his successor, but Hess was of course the Deputy Fuhrer. It's likely that Hess would have stepped aside or been ousted from this position by more dominant figures such as Goring. But then a decree in 1940 named Goring as the Reichsmarschall of the Greater German Reich, and this was a rank that was second to Hitler's. But on the 29th of June 1941, a week into Operation Barbarossa, a further secret decree was issued by Hitler, saying that if he ever lost the ability to make decisions, or if he was abducted, or if he disappeared, then it would be Goering who was to act as his deputy, and he was given the full power to act while Hitler was incapacitated. Goering would later use this for his own power grab. He saw the end of the war as his opportunity, and on the 21st of April 1945, the Red Army advanced into Berlin and began to encircle the city. Hitler along with Goebbels and Bormann were holed up in the Fuhrerbunker, and the area was being battered by artillery. Goering had left Berlin, and he went to his estate on the Obersalzberg, and with this he learned that Hitler's orders were not being obeyed, and that he knew that Hitler had admitted that the war was lost. Goering believed he was now in a better position and a safer position to negotiate peace with the Allies. Goering was informed on everything, and his adjutant, Karl Köhler, and Chief of Staff told him not to waste any time to try and save Germany. Goering was looking forward to one day being the man to take power, but he did not realise it would come so quickly. He wrote, "My Führer, General Köhler, today gave me a briefing on the basis of communications given to him by Colonel General Jodl and General Christian, according to which you had referred certain decisions to me and emphasised that I, in case negotiations would become necessary, would be in an easier position than you in Berlin. These views were so surprising and serious to me that I felt obliged to assume, in case, by 10 o'clock that evening, no answer is forthcoming, that you have lost your freedom of action. I shall then view the conditions of your decree as fulfilled and take action for the well-being of the nation and fatherland. You know what I feel for you in these most difficult hours of my life, and I cannot express this in words. God protect you and allow you, despite everything, to come here as soon as possible. Your faithful Hermann Goring." He worried about being regarded as a traitor, but was also concerned about betraying Germany. Goering looked through the 1941 decree and took action, and he said that by staying in Berlin, Hitler had become incapacitated, and that it was now best for Goering to seize power and to negotiate peace. He thought he was doing a favour, but Goering, on the 23rd of April 1945, sent a telegraph to Hitler to confirm that he was to become the leader of Germany by the words of the decree, and he outlined, as mentioned, that if he did not reply by 10 p.m. that evening, that Goering would take power. But it was the manipulations of Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, who spun the words of Goering into a treasonous coup, and Hitler ate this up. Hitler was enraged, and he issued, on the 25th of April, a telegram saying that Goering had committed high treason, and he ordered him to resign all his party titles and offices to save his life, and Goering immediately resigned, rather than going up against Hitler to face execution. But Martin Bormann then tried to arrest Goering. It was a betrayal of Goering that also aided towards Hitler's decision to take his own life in the bunker, but Goering of course would later be seized by the Allies, and he was then taken to the Nuremberg trials before he was condemned to death. He escaped the hangman's noose by taking cyanide the night before his execution. But the problem with Goering, and he being Hitler's successor, was that he was a man who was able to take power, and he was promised power, and he interpreted Hitler's position in the bunker as the Führer being incapacitated. This was of course a justified decision, and his decision was of course one which was informed by Hitler's previous decree, but Hitler did not see it in this way. Heinrich Himmler was another man who was considered powerful enough to take the position of Führer, and he was briefly appointed as a military commander and the commander of the replacement Home Army, and also as a commander of the General Plenipotentiary. Himmler was in charge of the administration for the entire Third Reich, and Himmler of course was the infamous powerful head of the SS, the man who many SS men were loyal to over the dictator. Himmler as a military commander was not up to the job, and he was later replaced from his military positions, but Himmler, as the war turned against the Germans, sought to try and save himself. He fled to a sanatorium, and he would meet Hitler for the last time on the 20th of April 1945, on Hitler's birthday. Hitler admitted during this meeting that he would not leave Berlin, but Himmler, along with Goering, left quickly after. Himmler then, the day after, tried to negotiate the release of concentration camp prisoners, and he tried to save his skin and make himself be perceived as a liberator and a national hero, rather than be the man who carried out and ordered much of the Holocaust. But then on the 23rd of April 1945, Himmler met with Count Bernadotte in Lübeck, and he claimed he was the provisional leader of Germany. In this meeting, Himmler was acting as Hitler's successor, and he said that Hitler would be dead within days, and he hoped that the British and Americans would fight against the Soviets and the remaining parts of the Wehrmacht. Himmler then asked Bernadotte to tell Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, that Germany wanted to surrender with the Western Allies, but did not want to surrender to the Soviet Union. Himmler even put this into writing, but days later the BBC broadcast Himmler's attempted peace negotiations, which had leaked, and Hitler was furious. Hitler had been betrayed by the very man who he referred to as a loyal Heinrich, only second to Goebbels in loyalty and devotion to Hitler. The dictator ordered Himmler's arrest, and he flew into a mad rage, ordering the execution of Himmler's representative inside the Fuhrerbunker, his own brother-in-law, Hermann Goring. Himmler would, though, go on a power grab, as a new government was forming in Flensburg, and he believed he was entitled to a position, but the new President Donitz rejected Himmler's proposals. He then went on the run, and this resulted in the Reichsfuhrer SS being captured inside of British custody, where he consumed cyanide and then died. He wasn't necessarily a man who was trusted to have been a successor by the Führer, but Himmler believed he was entitled to power and a significant and powerful position. But Joseph Goebbels was believed to have been one of Hitler's most devoted followers and his best friend, and the Minister of Propaganda would be rewarded for his long loyalty. As a man, Goebbels was a sleaze, and a man who committed much adultery upon his wife Magda, who wasn't much better herself, but the pair were close to the Führer. Goebbels went into overdrive during Hitler's rise to power, and he created the cult of personality, crafting propaganda, and gaining a wrestlehold over culture. But Goebbels was inside of the Fuhrerbunker at the end of the war, and he, along with his family, would never leave the area alive. Goebbels and his wife made the decision to bring their children into the underground bunker complex, and they knew they did not want to live in a world without Hitler. Goebbels knew that the war was only going one way, and he argued for a last stand in Berlin in the face of other Nazis who favoured Hitler moving to a new bastion of resistance, the Alpine Fortress. He and his wife had made their plan to take their lives and kill their children in the aftermath of Hitler's death, and Goebbels had burned his private papers weeks before. Joseph Goebbels was one man who did not, in the final days of Hitler's life, come into disgrace with the Führer's opinion. Goering and Himmler did with their peace negotiations and attempts to take power, but Goebbels remained as loyal as ever in the bunker. His final proclamation to the people of Berlin as the Gauleiter of the city said, "I call on you to fight for your city. Fight with everything you have got, for the sakes of your wives and children, your mothers and your parents. Your arms are defending everything we have ever held dear, and all the generations that will come after us. Be proud and courageous. Be inventive and cunning. Your Gauleiter is amongst you. He and his colleagues will remain in your midst. His wife and children are here as well. He, who once captured the city with 200 men, will now use every means to galvanise the defence of the capital. The battle for Berlin must become the signal for the whole nation to rise up in battle." But Hitler then took his own life, and Goebbels in this was appointed as the Reich Chancellor, a very significant position. He said he would refuse to obey Hitler's orders to leave Berlin, and he said this was the first time that he ever disobeyed the Führer. Goebbels on the 1st of May 1945 carried out his only act as Chancellor, and in this he dictated a letter to General Vasily Choykov, and he ordered German General Hans Krebs to deliver this under a white flag. The letter told Choykov of Hitler's death, and it requested a ceasefire, and this was then rejected, and Goebbels made preparations for his own death. He, along with his wife, died inside of the Reich Chancellery garden, with Goebbels shooting himself with a pistol. His body was only partially burned, and it would not be buried, finding itself later in the possession of the Soviets. His children had all been poisoned too. But Admiral Karl Donitz was the man who was appointed the head of the German state after Hitler's death, and he was made the President of Germany, and would serve in this position for just over 3 weeks. Donitz was made Hitler's successor in his last will and testament, and he knew that his role was to practically just offer surrender terms, as he knew the war was lost. Donitz did speak to the nation announcing Hitler's death, and he did organise the surrender documents. He was arrested weeks later, and his government was then dissolved. But Karl Donitz managed to avoid the gallows at the Nuremberg trials, as his clever lawyers managed to get him off a charge of waging unrestricted submarine warfare, as they managed to prove that the Allies had also done this. Admiral Karl Donitz was then sentenced to 10 years imprisonment inside of Spandau Prison, and inside this he was unrepentant, and he claimed he had done nothing wrong at all. But his involvement as the head of state and the president was rather minor, and it signalled the end of Nazi Germany's war efforts. But the successors of Adolf Hitler all had rather terrible tenures, and their lives ended in misery and bloodshed. Rudolf Hess, the Deputy Fuhrer, was left to rot inside of Spandau Prison for decades. Hermann Goring took his own life hours before he was due to go to the hangman's gallows. Heinrich Himmler lay dead inside of British custody centres after consuming poison. Goebbels refused to leave Hitler's side and died in the very same garden that Hitler's body was burned, and Donitz would get away with 10 years imprisonment. A number of these men, in the eyes of Hitler, were seen as traitors, and he ordered their arrests and even executions, and would also order that his former friends were to lose their power and jobs. But these men were the disastrous successors of Adolf Hitler. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.